Good morning. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I flew all the way here from the United States. I'm incredibly jet lagged. I'm very tired, and I can do a better good morning than that. Good morning. Excellent, a proper Australian welcome. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me here all the way from Dayton, Ohio in the United States to talk to you a little bit this morning about progressive animal control. One of the things that we find is, and echoing the speakers this morning, the first thing we need to do is stop animals from coming into our shelters. How do we accomplish that? So we're going to talk a little bit today and in tomorrow's session. This is actually broken up into two parts. We're going to talk about several different shelters in the United States. We're going to look at Santa Cruz Animal Control in California, the Spokane Scraps Shelter in Washington, as well as the Montgomery County Animal Resource Center in Dayton, Ohio. We're going to talk a little bit how each of those shelters has approached getting to zero by reducing their animal intake, by increasing the foot traffic through their doors for animal adoptions in their efforts to reduce euthanasia of companion animals. Bear with me, I hope the machine works properly. What is animal control? Well, according to the National Animal Control Association, summed up in this very succinct description, it's a program that effectively treats the symptoms while seeking to eliminate the causes by compassionately using the tools of education and enforcement. You'll notice that the word animal is never mentioned in there. In dealing with folks, and both the elected officials and some of the citizens that we speak with, sometimes animals do get lost in the equation. We end up speaking to financial experts, budgetary folks, the elected officials that we report to, and it's difficult to explain to them things unless you can speak in their terms, which is exactly what this is, government speak. So we move on and we talk about public perception. For the longest time, we were dog catchers. In fact, when I worked in the city of Norfolk, the first thing they did after they swore me in is take me down to the police museum and show us the original badge for our profession. This was actually issued to dog catchers, dog wardens, back in the late 1800s in Norfolk when animal control was simply the catch and kill contingent. Their job was four-legged trash control. They were told to go out and pick up dogs, take them to the county pound or the city pound. In that case, it was county pound because it was actually Princess Anne County. And there wasn't an adoption program. There wasn't rehoming. There wasn't even an effort to usually find an owner. It was simply clean them up, get them off the streets, and make sure they don't get back out again. Well, we have certainly come a long way from that particular paradigm of animal control. The public no longer accepts that. They do not want us out there simply picking up and killing animals. They want to make sure that we're making every effort to get those animals back to their homes. And if they're not able to go back to their original homes, to find them a new forever home. And if those animals are not able to be rehomed or readopted, then those animals need to be humanely cared for and treated until they meet their final end. The goal of this session is to help us move beyond dog catcher, move towards animal care and control officer. Another thing that I found in speaking in yesterday's session and speaking with some of the folks here, there tends to be somewhat of a rift between what we consider the original animal care and control, the council employee, and the folks that work in animal welfare. And part of what I'm here to talk about today and yesterday and for the rest of the week is we are not worlds apart. We are actually all working towards the same goal. We are all working, albeit in different fashions and different manners, but we are all trying to accomplish generally the same purpose, and that is find more homes for animals, save more lives, and in doing so, enrich our community and the pets in that community. When I worked in the police department, we were very strongly encouraged to follow a community policing model, and it's a philosophy that promotes organizational strategies which support the systemic use of partnerships and problem-solving techniques to proactively address the immediate conditions that give rise to public safety issues such as crime, social disorder, and the fear of crime, according to the United States Department of Criminal Justice. I said that without taking a breath. And again, when we went through our community policing classes, we read this statement and we sat there and went, wow, that's really deep. It means I'm not sure what. But I'll do it. I can do this. I can go out and I can be good. And we named our program PACE, Police Assisted Community Enforcement. And we were keeping pace with the community. Unfortunately, what we found was, as we implemented this program, the citizens had a new interpretation for those letters. Instead of it being Police Assisted Community Enforcement, it stood for Police Aren't Coming Ever. Why is that? Well, we rode around in cars, really nice cars, with the windows up. We went from call to call with the aircon on, and we didn't really get out and talk to the people in the community. And that's what the whole thing about community policing was, getting into the community, knowing the neighborhoods, knowing the neighbors, back when, the cop walked a beat, wherever it was. So what we started to work on with the community policing model is we switched it a little bit for animal control, and we wanted to get out and we wanted to know the folks. We wanted to get to know where the animals were. We wanted to get to know what the neighborhood problems were. The difference is it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and I found here coming to Australia, where I thought things would be very similar from place to place, I was confronted with the fact that you have X number of states and X number of local councils, and it's really very disjointed. A lot of folks do things very differently. What applies in one state in Australia may not apply in another. One state may have regulations regarding breed-specific legislation. Other states may ban breed-specific legislation. So when we talked about animal control and community policing, we wanted to be able to identify those problems, be able to figure out what we needed to do to keep animals from coming into the shelter in the first place, and then determine how those problems could be resolved. So for our model, we figured that preventative patrols, again, we wanted to be proactive versus reactive. And this was a way that we could get out into the community and go to those areas where we were seeing the most animals coming into our shelters from. It doesn't do me any good to patrol an area, especially an affluent community where few, if any, animals run at large, where we're not seeing animals cruelly treated for the most part, except because of acute political emergency and someone said they saw a dog once and we are directed by whoever to go patrol that community. That was just counterproductive. We weren't accomplishing anything. But when we were getting literally tens or dozens or even hundreds of animals from particular postal codes or particular cities and communities, that's where we needed to be, and that's where the officers needed to have their services concentrated. So we kind of broke away from the old mode, and we talked to folks and we said, why don't you drive through slowly with your windows down? And everybody said, oh, that's terrible. We'll let all the aircon out. I said, try and work on that. It's not going to be that bad. You'll actually hear folks, you'll hear dogs, you'll hear and see things that are happening in the community, and it'll give you an opportunity to be responsive. So if someone on the street corner waves their hand and yells, hey, they're not trying to hail a taxi, they need an animal control officer. Your vehicle doesn't look like a taxi, it doesn't have taxi on the top, it's got little dogs on the side. They're asking for your services, but with that window up and the aircon rolling and the radio at 10, you couldn't hear them if you tried. We wanted to stop and speak to people in a friendly manner. We didn't want to come across confrontational. It's like, hey, have you seen that stray dog running loose? No, you're not going to do very well there. And we were very friendly with the kids in the neighborhood. I used to roll around with a very large bag of candy bars because the kids would come up and they knew where every dog lived in the neighborhood. Hey, have you seen the black and white dog with the big frill? Oh yeah, that's the guy that lives over here. The dog's name's Milky Way bar. Thank you. Positive conditioning and reinforcement there. We had junior animal control officer stickers. We gave them badges and empowered them. These kids would have thought you had handed them a $100 bill. I've got a junior ACO badge. The guy over there gave it to me, and if you're not nice to animals, he's going to get you. So we actually signed up a whole army of junior animal control officers. The biggest challenge we find in jurisdictions in many cases is that we don't have enough warm bodies. If anybody in this room, does anyone here have enough staff to do everything they'd like to do? I hearken back to Sharon's presentation this morning. Money is a wonderful thing. It gives you the opportunity to have some ability to make choices. But we don't, and none of us will ever have all the resources we want. So we've got to go out and find those in the most unique places. Handing out coloring books and candy bars and some stickers to some kids may seem like, it's not really a great idea, but you'd be surprised at the response you get from the community because you treat their children like responsible adults. When we talk about working on this in Santa Cruz, they picked the city of Watsonville and they targeted 10 areas in 1 year. And the reason they took a year is because they wanted to do a long study, concerted effort to see if it would make a difference, if it would affect the number of animals coming into the shelter from those postal codes. And what they did is they wanted to have the officers go out and speak with citizens before there were issues. You know, a lot of times in animal services, animal welfare, we respond to telephone calls or emails. Someone calls us and says, I have a problem. And then we have to react to that problem and go out and try and fix it. And oftentimes the solution is not the best solution. It's either the fastest solution or the most politically expedient solution, or in some cases it's just enough to shut them up so we can get away from this call till the next one. When these officers went out and spoke to the residents, it was pre-problem. Hey, my name's Officer Smith. We're here today in your community talking about pet health and pet safety. No, we're not here to write you a ticket. No, we didn't get a complaint your dog was running at large. No, I don't need to see your registration, but thanks for offering. The officers in this particular case acted much less like law enforcement. And from the United States model, a lot of our animal control comes from a law enforcement background. In my state, animal control officers, dog wardens, have the same rights, authorities, and responsibilities as a police officer or deputy sheriff when we're enforcing animal laws, not when we're trying to pull someone over for driving under the influence. So it's a very narrow responsibility. But when you come across as law enforcement and you try and get people to do what you want them to do because I said so, did that work for anybody as a child? Well, my parents said, why do you have to do this? Because I said so. Because I'm your father. I always look for a way around that. And I found the public, unfortunately, has the same perception, that if you tell them, because I said so, because it's the law, because I'll throw you in jail, you don't get a positive response. So when officers acted less like law enforcement and more like educators, they were amazed at the response they got. In this particular community, they had a large Hispanic population, so the officers made this approach in a bilingual fashion. The materials that they produced, the conversations that they have with the community, they address both the English-speaking and the Hispanic, Spanish-speaking population so that they were attaching to both sides of the community and not leaving anybody out. Now, when they did preventive patrols, you always get to see stuff. Dogs running loose, the ubiquitous, I need to use the portable bathroom over here. But when they addressed these situations, rather than write citations, they did so in a method where they were trying to educate folks. What they saw, well, first of all, their impoundment rates fell. Gee, why do you think that happened? Because when they talked to the citizens, when they talked to the pet owners, they told them, hey, we're going to be out patrolling. Folks took that into mind, and instead of allowing their animals to just run loose or allowing them to go out and use the bathroom, haphazardly, they realized that the officers were kind of giving them a hint. Psst, there's going to be a patrol tomorrow. Spot might want to stay inside. Oh, why is that a good idea? Well, if he gets impounded, it's $100 to bail him out. Oh, we're doing a patrol tomorrow. You might want to keep Spot inside. If you repeat that long enough, people actually pay attention. And when you can counsel them against having to spend money that they don't have, they appreciate it. What else happened? Their spay, neuter, and license compliance rates went up because they were seeing officers in a non-confrontational situation. It wasn't a situation where the officer came up and said, let me see your license and rabies vaccination. It's, hey, your dog's supposed to be vaccinated against rabies and it's supposed to have a dog license. We just wanted to make sure you knew about that. Well, you're not going to write me a ticket? No. We just wanted to make sure you knew your dog had to have a license and a rabies vaccination. You sure you're not going to write me a ticket? Absolutely. I don't even have a citation book with me today. It's back in the truck, but they kind of played it off like that. So what happened is the community began to see animal control instead of as the enemy, the evil dog catcher. They viewed him as helpful, and then they started coming to the local shelter for education. Now, when the impoundment rates went down, what do you think went down along with that? I think I heard it over here. Did someone say euthanasia? Win a prize. One of the easiest ways to reduce euthanasia is simply to reduce your intake. The fewer animals you have to come up with outcomes for, the fewer possible euthanasias that may occur. And something as simple as a little bit of outreach and education, not sitting behind a desk, not rolling around in a truck with your windows up, reduce the euthanasia rate. Now, how much did that cost? Anybody? Nothing. They were already doing it. The only difference was instead of going out on patrol and writing citations and taking a law enforcement attitude approach, they went out in an educational approach. Same manpower, same amount of time, and the resources ended up costing them fewer euthanasias, fewer impoundments. Oops, we're going the wrong way there. We need to go to the right. There we go. So they did a door-to-door campaign. They targeted these areas in Watsonville. They actually generated the maps by using their 911 center. That's our call center in the United States. And they based it on the demographics for the number of calls and the number of animals they were receiving. They actually got out and did foot patrols in these areas. Now, you want to talk about some terrified officers. They have never been outside of a vehicle in their entire career. We have to walk a beat? I have experience with walking. I did so last night. I did 2 miles. It was not a pleasant experience, but you know what? It helps when you're in a community that you get out of the vehicle, especially when you can't drive through all the neighborhoods. You get out and walk and people see you. The officers swapped out their traditional uniform shirts with all the, collar brass and egg salad for a nice polo shirt, no badges, and they basically took the position that they were not going to take any enforcement action unless they ran across absolutely egregious animal cruelty or neglect. Period. Just wasn't going to happen. In those cases where they ran across a dog that didn't have a bucket of water and it was a hot day, in the past they issued a citation. They may have even seized the animal. Instead, they went and said, "Did you know Spot needs to have a bucket of water? By the way, I happen to have a gallon of fresh water in my vehicle. I can help fill that bowl until you can get a bucket." And they did the education. Your dog's not being impounded. I'm not writing you a ticket. I don't have to find a home for it because you're not going to be able to afford the fees or the fines. And all Spot really wanted was a drink of water. He's not dying in the sun, but because the code says you have to have access to constant fresh water, you're not in compliance. Okay, so we didn't write you a ticket today. The bilingual educational materials helped overcome some of the other challenges because a lot of folks, especially in our community with such transient populations, they have a deep-seated fear of law enforcement, especially if they're not in the country legally. And when folks are there and in uniform, the perception is somehow bad things will happen. So by having the materials that clearly explained they were there to deal with animal-related issues, they weren't there to check immigration status, anything like that, they broke down some of those barriers to communication, which again, also ended up in animals being impounded in the shelter and not reclaimed. Aha. So here we go. So if you look at the folks on the right, and you see the uniform with the egg salad and the badges and the very law enforcement style, you move over to the left, and then you have a little bit lighter side. Yes, we still have our police radio. Yes, we still have our cool utility belt with all our bat toys on it. But the polo shirts don't really look as imposing. And especially when you talk about Todd Stosoy right there in the middle with the mountain man beard that he hides animals in. Not a very imposing figure, okay? So they knocked on every door in the targeted areas. This isn't, we look at ones where we think there might be an animal because you know what? Sometimes you can't tell there's an animal there. They met with apartment managers in flats beforehand, set up community meetings. Again, they targeted the whole community. This wasn't a one door or every other door. This was make sure we reach every single person. Now, did every one of those people own a pet? Absolutely not. But how many calls do we get from non-pet owners complaining about animals? Barking dogs. Folks in here that handle barking dogs, hands up? Wasn't it lovely? People call about a barking dog. Most of the time don't have a dog of their own and they're upset because the dog's barking. They can't get any sleep. Sometimes the response is the dog gets removed or surrendered to the shelter. And next thing you know, their flat gets broke into and all their stereo equipment gets stolen. Then they call us and go, why didn't you stop the people from breaking into my house? It's like, well, you had a dog in the neighborhood that barked every time the thieves came by. When the dog left, so'd your stereo. Oops. The focus here was to interact with animals as well, to make sure that they addressed if they found animals running at large, if there were cases of animal cruelty and neglect, but they did not primarily focus on licensing or registration. They talked about it, but they didn't write summonses for it, issue infringements, and they didn't, come across heavily to folks. Now, in Montgomery County, dog licensing is my budget. I generate over $3 million a year. I sell around 75,000 dog registrations, and it is literally the lifeblood of my shelter, and that's how I operate. But again, you tend to get more response and a better license compliance rate when you get people to do it because it's the right idea and for the right reasons. You know, we don't go and tell people, buy a license because we need your money. We tell folks, your dog's license is your ticket home. If he's wearing a license when he's picked up, we bring him home at no charge, for free. There's no impoundment, no board fees, no citation. As long as he's wearing his tags, he gets a taxi ride home. If he does get impounded and he is wearing his license and we call you and you show up within the hour, no charge. Come on down. We appreciate it. That's what the license is designed for. If your dog's spayed or neutered, he's wearing his license and it takes you a day, we take off the price of the license from your impoundment and board fee. It's an instant rebate. Again, we're trying to make that license valuable, and that's why we have over 56% of our population in our county that comply. When Santa Cruz did this, they realized that getting folks and telling folks that you have to buy a license wasn't going to accomplish their goals. They wanted to remind them and get them to do it for the right reasons. What they did is they worked with the community to find out what the problems were and why they were ending up with animals coming into their shelter. And some of those things that they needed to provide were the basics, you know, dog shelters, dog houses, toys, enrichment items. You know, when you see animals like this that aren't being properly cared for, again, sometimes you have to take some immediate action. But in that door-to-door campaign, they probably only ran across a dozen of these in the communities during the door-to-doors. What they found were a lot more animals that needed some basic supplies, needed a little bit of help, but not in bad or egregious cruelty situations. When they did the door-to-door campaigns, they brought along a lot of stuff that was kid-oriented and kid-specific. You know, they brought toys or things that the children could share with their pets. They brought the junior law enforcement stickers. They bought the temporary tattoos. There were no actual children tattooed during the operation of this program. And their supply of toys. Now, you know what? You know how much that cost them? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Nothing. They got it all donated. Local pet stores donated materials. You know, they had little bags that had markers on it that mentioned where the donation came from. They got, you know, some local folks who are interested in helping in the community sponsor the printing for the stickers and the temporary tattoos. So again, this program cost nothing and stopped animals from coming into the shelter. These are some of the pets that they got to see out there, you know, and again, they're part of their family. You know, although we may sometimes look at the conditions and be a little concerned, these folks generally, in most cases, treat the animals as one of their own, and they provide for the animals to the best extent that they can in the same way that they provide to their family. You know, again, the little guy down here on the left, and that's pretty much a typical California Santa Cruz dog. You see a lot of Chihuahua and Chihuahua mixes. But, you know, arguably, if you look at this situation, it's not perfect. It's not great. The dog's on a short chain, but it's got a dog house. There's apparently something there for water for the dog. Looks like last night's dinner is this morning's breakfast for Chihuahua Man there. Not perfect, not great, but an opportunity for education. Now, in some jurisdictions, in some agencies, that dog would be subject to potential seizure, okay? If he's lived his life on the end of that fairly short chain, hasn't had a lot of interaction, do you think he's going to be a great candidate for rehoming or adoption in some cases? I've seen Chihuahuas. They stand there and shake. Tooth marks magically appear on my leg. They can be 1.5 feet away from me, and all of a sudden, what is that? They're Chihuahuas. They're difficult sometimes to place. It's why we see them, you know, filling up shelters in California. And unlike pit bulls, they've been sort of demonized in another fashion. I blame Paris Hilton. This dog will not fit in a pocketbook. In fact, if you try, you're going to come back with 4 fewer fingers than you started with. But they're great dogs, and this family loves this dog, and this family takes care of this dog to the best of their ability. And if you're able to devote some resources and education to assisting them, this dog will never come into my shelter. It will never face the potential for euthanasia. I'll never have to face the potential to find it a new home, which will be very challenging. And we've got a win for the dog. So in the door-to-door campaign, they saw their spay-neuter compliance went up by almost 50% in their targeted area. What happens if you spay and neuter dogs? They don't have little dogs. That means you don't have litters of puppies coming into your shelter. Again, a great way to stop the intake into the shelter. Dogs were removed from tethers without enforcement action. They counseled people on how to keep their animals without having to chain them up. They started TNR colonies without enforcement action. Again, when cats come into the shelter, their outcome is very poor. Our shelter has right around a 33% adoption rate, live release rate for cats. It's abysmal. Our return to owner rate for cats is a stunning 1%. And I handle about 3,000 cats a year. Now, in this particular case, when they started TNR colonies, fewer cats coming into the shelter, lower euthanasia. They provided dogs and cats with routine vaccinations. Again, they got it sponsored, so they provided it at no cost. Oops, we pushed the wrong button there. Ha! Go back. There we go. This is what I want to be at. They gave away 75 free dog houses, courtesy of their Habitat for Humanity, a local group that helps with folks who are in need of housing. Generally, in the United States, they build homes for people. In this case, their local group got together using the scraps from some of their building projects, built dog houses. I'm being a broken record here. Guess how much that cost? Nothing. Good. You guys are learning. They provided hundreds of free Kongs. Thank you to Kong, one of the sponsors here today. As enrichment toys for backyard dogs, they provided hundreds of free collars, free tags, free leashes, and free bowls. What's the key word in that sentence? Free. Awesome. All these items were donated through local media campaigns, which meant their sponsors received some recognition as well. And when they went to the community meetings, they partnered with regular and traditional law enforcement, police officers, deputies, sheriffs. The community meetings were shelter or animal control specific, and they attempted to address both sides so that folks didn't have to get both situations at the same time. When they talked about sheltering, they talked about outcomes for animals. They talked about what happened when animals became impounded. They talked about adoptions. They talked about alternatives to bringing your pet to a shelter. Again, that proactive response. I can't keep my dog or cat anymore. Should I bring it to you? No, we have options. And those options ensured that animals didn't come into the sheltering community, didn't have to potentially face a euthanasia outcome. Again, they looked at whether or not they were dealing with nonprofit groups. There were other interested fosters and rescue groups. They didn't turn anybody away. They brought everybody in and said, what can we do to help you help us? Excellent idea. You have a group that's neutering feral cats. Have we got a zip code for you to focus on? Come on down. We'll help you out. We've got traps. We've got carriers. I've got warm bodies. You can't pick them up on Tuesday? I can pick them up on Tuesday. You can't get them back on Wednesday? No worries. We have a taxi service. It'll drop them right back off for you. What's your challenge now? Oh, we don't have enough of this. I can find that. We don't have a vet. Let's go talk to the vets. That type of community collaboration and cooperation is designed to reduce target populations. As I mentioned in the sustaining coalitions I'll talk about a little bit later, in the last 2 years, from 2010 to 2013, we took in 3,333 cats at my shelter alone. Through our programs in the past 2 years, if we hold true to the numbers so far, by the end of August 31st, through the end of the year, I will take in just over 1,540 cats for the entire year. That's a 50% reduction in 2 years. And you know how much it cost me? Nothing. We just changed how we worked. So when folks tell you I don't have enough money, I have all the money I need, I just need to use it more effectively. Officer Todd Stosey of the Santa Cruz Animal Services Authority, he served as an incident commander during fires that they had in that county, coordinating the deployment of the trailers. His hard work, compassion, courage, and love of the job are to be acknowledged. He enforces humane laws, proactively creates programs and education, humane treatment of all animals. He is largely responsible for creating this program in Santa Cruz. Todd is the current president of the National Animal Control Association and was actually an appointee that I appointed during my tenure as president to fill a vacant spot. Animal control in the past has been perceived as the enemy. Animal control in the past has been perceived as part of the problem. We have been not one of the solutions, and the public's perception of us has been, in some cases, dim. Well, Ideally, we need folks like this in animal welfare and progressive animal services employees that simply aren't willing to accept euthanasia as an only outcome. You know, folks need to be prepared to think outside the litter box, to work with others, and to be able to accept new ideas, to be able to accept new programs, and to be willing to, ask questions. I joke with folks that I always like to ask a question because there's 3 responses that I can get. People can say yes, they can say no, or they can say no and laugh at me. I've had a lot of people laugh at me over the years, but I keep asking the question because eventually I'm going to find a way to get to yes. For me, euthanasia is a no. I don't want to get to euthanasia. I want to get to 0. When they engaged the media in this program, they wanted to make sure the public knew what was happening, and as well as their elected official. They did a variety of press releases. They did press conferences. They invited the local reporters from the news channels and the local newspapers to ride along and actually see what they did. They got a real eye-opening picture of what animal services is like. We don't walk around with a big axe. We're not killers. We don't get into our vehicles and try and run down pets. And I've literally had citizens tell me that. Or you don't gas them in the truck on the way back to the shelter, do you? These are actual comments that I've had from the public. If I had a dime for every person that's told me, you got this job because you like to kill animals, I would have been richer than Donald Trump, monetarily, but my soul would have burned. Not the case. When they brought these folks in and brought them out and let them see what the officers actually did, again, they kind of pushed away that harsh image, and they got folks to understand that we are all part of our community. I live in my community, I work in my community. I want it to be a healthy and safe community for the people and for the pets. How hard is that? It's not very difficult if you get out and actually become involved. After engaging the media in their press releases, this is one of the examples. Watsonville, since February 1, Animal Services Officer Shauna Urato has purposely tried to strike a less imposing figure. None of this. Instead of hair pulled into a slick back ponytail, she lets her dark mane loose. I had to ask Todd. I said, Todd, were you writing a press release or an introduction for one of those movies we're not allowed to watch? Instead of the typical tan formal collared shirt officers wear, she dons a dark blue short sleeve polo shirt, moderating the latest in green style pants. But her badge is less conspicuous and her utility belt is not carrying as many intimidating items. I weighed my utility belt when I worked for the police department. I was carrying 34 extra pounds on my waist. I had bat tools for everything. I didn't need most of them. My best tool was the leftover half of a cheeseburger I had for lunch. I caught more dogs with that cheeseburger. I actually was stopped, and I mentioned the other day I was driving down the road in one of my patrol districts, and I had a wonderful ice cream. It was a hot summer day, and I was enjoying my ice cream. One of the guys stopped me and he says, "You use that to catch dogs?" I'm like, "No, dude, I like ice cream." But a little bit later that afternoon, I stopped to chase a dog, and I didn't have my half a cheeseburger, but I still had the wrapper from the ice cream cone with some of that sticky vanilla ice cream soft serve on it. And I got out, and I got down, and I held the wrapper out, and I said, "Come here." And you know what? I caught a dog. Went back to the guy and said, "Dude, you're right, it works." The metamorphosis for these folks is all part of a new pilot program by the Santa Cruz Animal Services designed to focus on education and community outreach as opposed to simply responding to complaints and violations. This is about showing the more friendly side of animal services, Jurado said. We want to educate the community about the services and the special deals available. Now she's a used dog salesperson. I can get you into a used lab, low mileage, only one owner. We take out some of the factory installed equipment, we send it to dealer prep, give it that new dog smell, and I can get it into your home for the low, low, low price of $50. Spayed, neutered, microchip, vaccinated, pet behavior assessed. It's been checked by our vet staff. What more could a family ask for? What? You guys are laughing. That's great. But you know what? I just rehomed a dog. Again, look at that lovely mane and look at the guy on the left. All right, Johnny Space Commando's got the bat phone and Bluetooth ear receiver there. He's got the space age pager on there. He's got his baton. That cat does not look happy. But check out the lady on the right. She's pretty awesome. Which do you see as the more imposing figure? Gentleman on the left, right? Correct. Just making sure. When they talked to law enforcement and other government agencies, they wanted to go to the task force meetings because they realized that law enforcement has a lot of contact with people with pets. They asked to join those task forces. They met with the chiefs, the lieutenants, the policymakers. They then reached out to the environmental health professionals, the code enforcement folks, and the other agencies, part of collaboration building and trying to reduce their workload. What happens when you have a drunk driver that you pull over at 10 o'clock at night that has a dog in a car? In America, you can have a couple of outcomes. One can be very unfortunate. Most of our officers are armed and they're not real comfortable around dogs. So by speaking to the officers and explaining, you don't have to take the dog out of the car. We will send an officer to you and pick that pet up. And you know what? 10 o'clock at night, we'll take it back to their family and said, we're sorry, Dad's going to jail for drunk driving, but here's Spot. He really didn't want to go for that stay. It works, and that dog never comes into the shelter. The low-cost and free or spay-neuter programs, they got vouchers for low-income folks. The Friends of Watsonville Animal Shelter and the Friends of Santa Cruz Animals provided these $40 certificates to get animals spayed or neutered. There was a low-income requirement. They worked with Planned Parenthood to provide access to high-quality, low-cost spay and neuter services for all residents, all residents, all residents. People who are affluent and don't get their animals fixed and have a litter that end up in your shelter, is there any difference between someone who is not financially able that doesn't get their pets fixed and it ends up in your shelter? There were no income requirements. They required a rabies vaccination, a dog license, and a microchip. The program was self-sustaining and self-funding. It cost the shelter nothing. Average cost of supplies and material, the veterinarian's salary, they had a charge for additional services, and they actually found they could generate revenue. They had fees for additional services with the microchips, fees for licensing, rabies vaccinations, but again, all reasonable. They found the actual cost for the program, $10 for the microchip. The license, they was 100% revenue, and they made $2 off the rabies shots. Spayed or neutered dogs with Planned Parenthood, the prices were rather large. They had different fees for animals over a certain weight. But again, they were getting lots more animals fixed and reduced their intake at their shelter and increased spaying neuter by 50%. Fix a Pet, they had a great program, free for all pit bulls. Approximately 17% of the dogs that enter their shelter are pit bulls, so their special price for spaying and neutering in the community was focused on their welfare. The events brought people to the shelter, they reduced their adoption fees, they partnered with their local community groups, and they made it fun to come visit the shelter. Bagels for Bunnies, the Meow Luau, and Halloween Hoedown were all events that they held focusing on adoptions and getting more animals placed. So what we've heard today in this section, in this segment, is one, you can do it for nothing. You can get lots of animals into great homes by focusing on proactive response in the community, by softening the image of animal control. The public will become more responsive, and they will do it because it's the right thing to do, not because you told them they had to do it. Fewer animals become impounded, fewer animals become euthanized, and we're closer to getting to zero. And that's my presentation for this morning. Thank you.